Literally every time I watch that scene, I get the chills. 안녕하세요, 하이채드입니다. Memories of Murder was one of Bong Joon-ho's earliest films, but in my opinion, one of the best films that I've ever seen. So beyond it just being entertaining, Memories of Murder is like a work of art. So today I'm going to talk about the 5 top things that make it so awesome. And a lot of the following things I'm going to talk about for the movie do include spoilers. So number 1, we're actually going to talk about the end of the movie, and that is the very final scene of the movie, which I think is the greatest movie scene of all time. So the final scene takes place years after the rest of the movie. Song Kang-ho, or Detective Park, he has now moved on, and I think he's got a regular job like a salesman or something, and he just so happens to be driving past where the opening scene of the movie is, where the first crime scene was discovered. He decides to look in this little ravine, this little canal where the body was found. As he's looking kind of into this little canal, a girl comes up to him and kind of asking what he's doing, and then she says, "It's interesting, there was a guy here earlier doing that same exact thing." So he asks, well, what did he say he was doing? And she says he remembers doing something here a long time ago. And so Song Kang-ho starts to realize, like, oh my gosh, this is probably the murderer. And so he asks her, what did he look like? And she says he just looked like a normal person. And then this is really the great part of the scene, is that the angle kind of shifts and Song Kang-ho is looking directly into the camera. And it's as if he's looking into the audience to find the killer, that the killer is still unknown to us and still could be amongst us. And I just imagine if I was able to watch this movie in theaters, had I been in the audience, how maybe uncomfortable and scary it would be to be like, oh my gosh, the killer could be anybody. You know, the killer was never caught. The killer's out here amongst us. And of course, the killer was recently caught. But at the time this movie came out, the killer had not been caught. Literally every time I watch that scene, I get the chills. And I think it's the greatest ending scene of a movie of all time. So Bong Joon-ho is actually using a technique called breaking the fourth wall. And so if you imagine you're watching a movie, you can kind of see what we would identify as the first 3 walls, kind of what's in front of you and what's on the sides. And our viewpoint is from what they call the fourth wall. We're kind of looking in to see this reality, right? Like we're on this other side of the fourth wall and we're looking in, and this is the viewpoint in which we see it. And in a few movies, you'll see what is called breaking the fourth wall. And that's when the people in the film actually acknowledge us, the audience.
Oh, hello.
This thing is so awesome. It will shred anything.
They bought it.
But what's really cool about this does not happen until the final scene of the movie. As the audience, we haven't been acknowledged at all until this final scene when Song Kang-ho looks literally like, it looks like he's just looking through the screen straight into our eyes, trying to decipher who amongst you out there is the killer. And it's the only time I've seen it happen in a movie where the rest of the movie, there's no breaking through the fourth wall, but the final scene, it happens. And I think Bong Joon-ho does that in a really powerful way. So next I want to talk about the use of comedy in this. Of course, this movie is a very serious movie and a very serious topic, and what Bong Joon-ho has become very well known for since this movie has come out and movies following it is the use of dark comedy. And a lot of the dark comedy in this movie comes from the fact that these policemen, these detectives are way overmatched. They don't have the resources, they don't have the training to catch this killer, and I think sometimes that's shown in a very comedic way. And the use of comedy in a movie as serious as this naturally will have some darkness to it, and you see it in different areas throughout the movie. All the drop kicks that happen throughout the movie, that's one thing that Americans are a fan of because they have no idea why it happens, but it is really funny. So my favorite parts of dark comedy in this movie are actually related to scene transitions. So there's one point where Detective Park has a theory, and the chief kind of sarcastically asks him if in order to prove this theory, he's just gonna walk around pulling the pants down of every man around the city.
그거 조사 어찌하려고 그래? 길 가던 남자들 바지 합시 다 벗기볼래?
And of course, that's unreasonable, but in the very next scene, we have Detective Park in the bathhouse checking everybody out. And it's funny because it's obviously very comedic, but the darkness comes from the subject matter, the fact that they're actually trying to find a serial killer. This is still a really heavy topic. And there's another scene where a young student is telling one of the detectives like, hey, you know, go check out the bathroom for yourself to see what I'm talking about.
차라리 여기 한번 변소에 가보세요.
엄마, 넌 내가 그렇게 한가해 보이냐?
And the very next scene, we see him in the bathroom checking it out for himself. There's also a scene where the mentally handicapped young man kind of just pops out of nowhere. They're all having dinner, it's like serious conversation. He literally just falls out of a closet because he's been sleeping in there. That provides good comedy, it lightens up the mood, but it does another thing. It also provides foreshadowing because later on in the movie, we find out that that guy is actually a witness to the murder. And the reason he's a witness is because he's always falling asleep in odd places. And he's fallen asleep kind of in the middle of this almost foresty type area, and he actually witnesses the murder because it wakes him up. But throughout the movie, you can obviously see a lot of use of dark comedy, and Bong Joon-ho, I think, is one of the absolute best at using dark comedy. So the third thing I want to talk about is character arcs. I'm going to focus on two of the detectives here. In the beginning of the movie, we have Detective Park, who is constantly thinking he can know things through intuition, looking at people, looking into their eyes, reading people.
얘들 얼굴을 딱 보다 보면은 어느 순간에 감이 딱 와.
He's quite violent.
왜는 이 새끼가 말을 안 들으니까.
But as the movie goes on and he sees more of this seriousness, more of this awfulness, his character becomes much more sympathetic. And he actually starts to realize how powerless he is.
저부터 이런 놈들하고.
We have that scene where he's looking into the eyes of the suspect. And we also get that same angle where we can look into the eyes of the suspect as well, as if we're Detective Park trying to figure it out. And he's just like, I just don't know. And that's a big character change from the beginning of the movie. And then we have Detective Suh, who is, in the beginning of the movie, the more analytical one.
서류들만 자세히 훑어봐도 알 수 있죠. 서류는 절대 거짓말 안 하거든.
We can find him frequently in the background, looking at documents, looking at evidence, solving problems and eliminating suspects by paying very close attention to what the evidence says. But as Detective Suh also starts to feel helpless and starts to feel powerless with all of this going on, he realizes that his methods can't stop it. You see his character start to change. He becomes much more violent than he ever was at the beginning of the movie. Even when the DNA test comes back in saying like, hey, it looks like this guy's innocent, he's like, there's a mistake in the test. And he actually tries to shoot the suspect himself.
그럼 다 거짓말이야. 필요 없어.
Something we would have never seen from him at the beginning of the movie. So Bong Joon-ho does an excellent job with character development. And yes, this movie is about a serial killer, but through Bong Joon-ho's character development, we see how this movie is also largely about how people handle a situation like this, something so devastating, and being powerless to be able to fix it. The fourth thing is that Bong Joon-ho doesn't use a lot of cuts or zooms or angle changes in this movie, which is really interesting. If you watch a lot of movies, especially nowadays, you'll see a lot of cuts, a lot of zooms, a lot of angle changes. And we don't see that too much in this movie, and he doesn't resort to using that tactic to kind of get our attention or to build up drama or excitement. Typically throughout this movie, Bong Joon-ho will keep everybody in the scene and won't cut to a new angle. He'll keep the scene running and then direct our attention wherever it needs to go. So typically in a scene like this with someone falling over, you'd either see a zoom or a new angle, but we stay right behind Detective Park so that we can kind of see his perspective on it. We don't ever lose his perspective throughout the scene, but the fall happens in the middle of the screen so we can still see it, but we see it from Detective Park's perspective. But one thing that's really cool, and I think that Bong Joon-ho was really creative with, is how he removed people from scenes, whether it be through drop kicks or a slight camera change or somebody getting pushed out of the scene, or even a creative way of entering the scene as we showed this clip before. Obviously, it's much more difficult to film this way and you have to be much more creative and really trust your actors, but Bong Joon-ho did an excellent job and it paid off. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about is how Bong Joon-ho uses the weather to actually set the mood and kind of mood changes in this film. So in the opening scene of the movie, when we see Detective Park kind of going out to discover the first crime scene, you can see that it's like sunny, it's bright out. You can feel the warmth through the camera lens. But from that point on, almost through the entire movie, there's kind of a dark and dreary hue over the coloring of the film. And the purpose of that is kind of to convey what the feeling is in this town, that there's just this dark and dreary feeling. Everybody's living in panic, everybody's frustrated, everybody's scared. And so that sets the tone for the movie. And because we know the killer will strike every time it rains, and so that rain brings that added suspense, and for the viewer, it conveys the urgency that we are running out of time, that we have to find this killer before he strikes again. So Bong Joon-ho is actually able to use rain to kind of convey like a passage of time. There's no clocks involved, no ticking timer. The only time we're able to see the brightness and kind of the warmth come back is all these years after the crimes have passed. We see Detective Park with his family, he started a new job, and in fact, when he goes back to the original crime scene, that's when we finally see the warmth enter back into the picture. So there's the 5 reasons why I think Memories of Murder is such an excellent movie and really a work of art. I think it's probably my favorite Bong Joon-ho movie of all time. It's a movie that I really thought about for a long time, and I still think about it. It's a movie that I would like to share with more of my friends, so hopefully I'll be able to do that in the future. If there's any other movies that you would like me to kind of do a breakdown into why I think they're so good, whether I've seen them or why I haven't, I'd love to hear any suggestions. Obviously, the killer was caught very recently, which is great news, so I think it would be fun to go back and watch this movie again with some friends, knowing what we know now, knowing that the killer's been caught. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you guys next time.